Deputy Speaker, it's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady, and I might touch on some of her themes as I make some progress. The Minister will forgive me for repeating some of the issues that I've raised before, not least during the committee stage. I mean, my main point, I think, would be this, that pension policy in Britain has always been at its best when it goes with the grain of how our society works and of how our people work and live. It is also at its best when we have the courage for long-term planning, with timescales and periods of notice that enable men and women to properly plan their lives and their retirements. It was over 100 years ago that this Parliament first legislated for old age pensions. Why? Because it started to understand the extraordinary fact that many working people, for the first time in broad numbers, were outliving their working lives, and hence there was a need for an income in old age. We then, of course, had the great national insurance reforms, which the Liberal Party has much credit for introducing, and particularly, of course, the great report by the Liberal reformer William Beveridge. And I was thinking of William Beveridge when I was listening to the Honourable Lady for Cardiff Central, because when Beveridge produced his report in 1942, it was hardly in the most auspicious of public spending circumstances. He and those in the Labour Party who supported the Beveridge plan had huge opposition from many in the Tory party, but not all actually, and of course in particular from the Treasury. Imagine the huge opposition from the Treasury to this outlandish idea that we could have a new national insurance settlement in the post-war world when we didn't really know where our pennies were coming from. And yet today the Liberal Party is just blown away with a little blow of the lips from the Treasury. Blown away. Thank goodness there were decent, strong Liberals in the 1940s who were not blown away when the Tory monetarists spoke. If the National Insurance Plan from Beveridge enabled us to see a future which still lasts today, we can think of other things that ran with the grain of how people work and live in this country, not least the home responsibilities payments that started to recognise that women had children, they needed to leave the labour market, but we should properly insure them through the national insurance system for those responsibilities. Later we introduced similar provisions for those who are caring for elderly people and others. So here we now face this challenge of longevity, and all of us are united in understanding the demography and understanding that pension ages in both the occupational sector and the state sector need to increase. I think that's where we do have agreement. But where I disagree is with the very crude, deficit developed way in which this policy is now being forced through this Parliament. Because I believe that the coalition government assumes certain things which I would at least like to question. One assumption is that broadly everyone in society is now benefiting from longevity. Everyone is going to live well into their late 70s and 80s, regardless of social class and regardless of something that's closely related to socio-economic status, Madam Deputy Speaker, location, where we live in our cities or our towns and our rural areas. No, I won't. Not just at the moment, because I want to set out my three assumptions, and then I will try to deal with one of your possibly false or accurate assumptions. The second assumption is that British people live and work in very similar ways, that we have similar working patterns, we start work at more or less the same time, and we retire more or less at the same time. The third assumption is that should we increase, as it looks like we will do, the pension age and the retirement age, that work will somehow be available. That if we're working at 66 or 67 or whatever it might be, this government's extraordinarily brilliant economic and employment policies will deliver labour for the people. It's those three assumptions that I want to question, but I'm happy to give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm very grateful. Longevity and extended life expectancy is key to this argument, and you point out that longevity is not necessarily equally spread across the whole of society. Are you actually saying that in recent years that there are certain sectors of society that have benefited from longevity more than others, and actually life expectancy hasn't risen, however the differences exist, hasn't risen together? So what you're saying that some people, life expectancy hasn't risen at all?
Some people it hasn't, but broadly speaking, my understanding would be that for all socioeconomic groups it has increased, and my assumption is that it will go on increasing. But it's the differences by social class that the Honourable Gentleman now enables me to tease. Well, look, I'm about to... No, I think, with respect, I think what I say will be helpful to the Honourable Gentleman, and he'll tell me where I've got it wrong if I have got it wrong. If you analyse mortality by social class, and we look at... I'm going to talk about men in particular, but there's a class difference for women too. If we look at mortality by social class, and I'm looking at those people from social class 7, they tend to be in routine occupations, for example, labourers, van drivers, packers and cleaners. For women, many would be cleaners. If we look at social class 7, it may surprise the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, despite all this talk of longevity and how we're all going to live to 100, the Minister keeps telling us, he issues the press notice every few months, that 1/5 of us, 1/6 of us will live to 100. It may surprise the House that for men from social class 5, 19%, so almost a fifth, currently die before the age of 65. So these hard-working, working-class people in these tough jobs, no doubt they've had associated tough lives, almost 1/5 of social class 7 die before 65. And I just put that one point to him and to the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, because before we glibly say let's increase to 66 to 67, let's recognise that a lot of our fellow citizens do not live to 65. Do not. I will in just a moment. Can I say that the contrasting figures, but this time for dying before 60 for women, for social class 7 are 10%, and for the professional class it's only 4%. I should have said earlier that my contrasting figure for the professional class against that 19% is 7% of men. So there is a huge social class differential, and if we're not careful, although one would need to do the arithmetic very carefully, we might be ruling more and more people out of ever getting their old age pension if we glibly increase... I'll give way to the Minister first and then to you, sir.
I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman, and he does raise very important issues, but I wonder, I don't think he was Pensions Minister at the time, but he'll be aware the 2007 Pensions Act raised the state pension ultimately to 68. Why did he support that, given the points he's making now?
Well, because I made the point that I recognise the logic of demography and longevity, that we do need to raise pension ages. But I would also recognise that since ceasing to be a minister of any kind, I've had more opportunity to think about this and to study it. Well, the minister might try thinking independently. It's not a bad idea. I wouldn't giggle at the idea that from time to time we rethink our positions, and I have rethought my position on this, not least prompted, of course, by the fact that this government is now going helter-skelter towards raising the pension age in ways that my Labour government never did foresee. The Honourable Gentleman wants to come in and then...
Thank you. I'm very grateful for you giving way a second time. You talked about a particular group, and I wasn't sure if it was class 5 or class 7, of where 19% of those in that class die before they reach 65. Of those, how many were actually in work at the time? Is this a social problem relating to health, or is it because of the nature of the work that they have done? The reason I ask this is that I'm concerned that we're using this group and trying to say that we can't move the age because of this particular group, whereas actually everyone's life expectancy, regardless of how tough a life you have had, has increased over the last 20, 50 years.
Can I just help the honourable gentleman who's done an intervention here? I do very closely follow the question of women's pension age and longevity, but in the debate he's not addressing me, you. He's addressing the rest of the members in the chamber. He's done it several times now. I'm just asking him very gently to observe the convention. Malcolm Wicks.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you. I think on the specific question, I can't inform the gentleman how many were actually working when they died. I do want to say something later about the circumstances of that group of people. I'm happy to give way to the honourable member.
I'm very grateful to the right honourable member who has much experience in these matters, but can I put it to him that the reason he voted in 2007 for the increase in the pension age was simply because the statistics to which he referred have changed so much. In 1911, when the first pension was introduced at the age of 65, actually the average life expectancy of a male in the United Kingdom was purely 66. And he made the point that there are some people still today who die before 65. Back in 1911, the vast majority of males are in fact dying before that age. Life expectancy today is now at 87 for the average male in the country. So would he not agree that in fact the changes in the state pension age reflect a huge change in longevity and have in fact moved very slowly?
If you get to 65, if you reach 65.
I'm bound to say it's not 87, sir. I mean, if you look at a newborn girl born in the UK, a newborn baby girl in the UK will live on average 80 to 82, maybe a boy 77, something of that kind. I mean, obviously, once you've survived to 65, many people will live into their 80s. But I understand the broad point that's being made. I want to conclude a little later by talking about a sensitivity that we can introduce into the system that I think might meet some of these problems, although the Minister so far has resisted it. But I do want to refer to the association between social class and location, which I know various colleagues are very interested in, very knowledgeable about. And it's not actually just a broad sort of difference between, say, living in Kensington and living in parts of Glasgow, because even within many of our big cities, there are huge class differences when it comes to mortality. So across Sheffield, for example, there is a difference of over 14 years between different parts of the city. Even in Kensington and Chelsea, the borough with the highest life expectancy, there is a difference of 8 years between the most deprived and least deprived wards, which for those of us who know Kensington is not so surprising. So these differences and unfairnesses are reflected in terms of where people live in our cities. Before I talk about the idea that I've been trying to persuade the Minister to accept, can I just also add my own pressure on this question of, Minister, where will the jobs be? Where will the jobs be? We are living through a period again of rising unemployment, when many people, good graduates with good degrees in their 20s, cannot get jobs, when many people in their 30s and 40s cannot get jobs. Are we really assuming that if we make these accelerated changes, and of course it's the acceleration, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Minister knows is the difference between what a Labour government did and what this coalition government did, are we confident that there will be work available? Let me give some data on this. At the moment, if you look at men aged 62, 39% are not working. By age 64, 52% are not working. So huge proportions of men at the moment coming up to what is meant to be their retirement age are effectively retired already from the labour market. For women, if you look at women aged 58, 36% are not working. And my fear, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I put this to the Minister, is that we'll be extending a kind of benefit twilight loan, where people are not eligible for their state pension because we're raising the age, but they'll be jogging along on whatever we call incapacity benefit, on different kinds of benefits. No one in the job centre pretending that these folks will get work. The Minister not able to pretend that, but there'll be this huge kind of army of people in this twilight zone living in some state of desperation. I'm happy to give way.
The figures last week, the Honourable Member, I'm sure will have the same concerns as we all have. Is the unemployment